From translation, NKJV New King James Version, this 151 day of the year, today we are reading passages Esther 6-10, Esther chapter 6, verses 1 to 14. That night the king could not sleep. And he commanded the book of records of the chronicles to be brought, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the king said, "What honor or dignity has been done to Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." Then the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So the king's servants told him, "Haman is there." Then the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" Then Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal clothing be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crown placed on its head. And let this clothing and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then Haman said to the king, "Let royal clothing and horse be given to Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken concerning him." So the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the clothing and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew. Leave nothing of all that you have said, and do so for him." Then Haman took the clothing and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward Mordecai went back to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hurried to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Esther chapter 7, verses 1 to 10. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And on the second day at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be given to you. What is your request, even to half of the kingdom? It shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine, and went into the palace garden. But Haman remained to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the bed where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said before the king, "Look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at Haman's house." Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. Esther chapter 8, verses 1 to 17. On that day King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told him what he was to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, wept in bewilderment before him, and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and if the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces." The king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in your eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters of the plans of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged on the gallows because he laid his hand on the Jews." You yourselves write in regard to the Jews, as you please in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For a document written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews, to the captains of the provinces, to the satraps, to the governors, and to the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. And he sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding royal horses bred from swift steeds. By these letters the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to plunder their possessions, on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published to all peoples, so that the Jews would be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. Esther chapter 9, verses 1 to 32. In the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the word of the king and his law were to be put into effect. On this day the enemies of the Jews had hoped to have power over them, but it turned out the other way, so that the Jews themselves had power over those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand against them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those who did the king's work, helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent. Thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, destruction and doing as they pleased with those who hated them. In Shushan the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Also Parshandasa, Dalpon, Espasa, Porasa, Adalia Aridasa, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, Vajzasa, the 10 sons of Haman the son of Hamidasa, the enemy of the Jews. They killed them, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. On the same day the number of those who were killed in Shushan the citadel was brought before the king. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the citadel, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition?" "It shall be granted to you. What is your further request? It shall be done." Then Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The rest of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered and defended their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This was done on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the same month they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. The Jews who were in Shushan gathered together on the 13th day, and on the 14th, and on the 15th day of the month they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwell in the unwalled towns celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and sending portions of food to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, instructing them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar annually, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, of sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted and undertook to continue, as they had begun and as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume and to destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter that his wicked scheme which he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. So these days were called Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them, the Jews established and imposed it upon themselves and their descendants and all who would join them, that without fail they would celebrate these 2 days every year, according to the written instructions and according to the appointed time annually. So these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. These days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, nor should the memory of them die among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their fasting and lamentation. So Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, with all authority, confirmed this second letter of Purim. Esther chapter 10, verses 1-3. And King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and on the coastlands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all his countrymen.